presentation, go through a little bit of a literature review so you understand kind of where the literature is on this topic of leadership and leadership for operational excellence. And then I'm going to talk about a framework that I've developed that will include elements related to helping to enhance operational excellence from the leadership and infrastructure perspective. I'll talk a little bit about some of the models and tools that we have that can help the operational excellence and change, and then conclude and provide some ideas for future research or future areas that you can focus on. So let's start with the presentation objectives. This morning's presentation, I'm going to first look at the current literature and practice. Both the literature and practice, as Ellen said, I've got quite an extensive background in operational excellence and process improvement. And so a lot of these not only are from the literature, but this framework is also developed from kind of the school of hard knocks, of really facing a lot of the challenges that leaders face to understand, how do I put an operational excellence program together so that it really becomes effective. There's nothing worse than having these wonderful tools and methods and then not really leveraging them. So that's really the focus of the objectives of this framework. So I'll describe the Six Sigma Leadership Framework, and then I'll also go over some case study examples from some of my experience of what has been effective and what could potentially work for your organizations. And then we'll also then finish with the focus areas for how we could enhance and better apply this SSAT/SLF framework. So let's go into the literature review. So I looked at the existing literature. I looked at the academic research-oriented literature, so journal articles that you might find in academic type databases, and then also applied journals such as American Society for Quality Progress, or the Institute of Industrial Engineers magazine. So really application-based types of magazines and trade journals. So what I found looking at the literature, and over quite a period of time, because obviously there's lots of learnings from the past and then also more current learnings about how to focus the leader's role in operational excellence. And that's what we're going to focus on here. So what I found is the importance of executive sponsorship. I think all of us who've been in this business in any type of industry know that the first and most important element is to get top management committed to operational excellence. And then we'll talk a little bit more about how that commitment becomes reality. And then the second element, the second success factor, is program governance, the need for infrastructure, methodology, tools that can be applied for operational excellence. And then the last piece is to try to ensure strategic alignment by selecting and prioritizing your Six Sigma or operational excellence projects. So let's delve into these elements a little bit deeper. So first, on executive sponsorship, some of the key elements related to executive sponsorship were, again, that consensus for the need for top management commitment. We all know that we've probably seen and heard of grassroots type efforts that start in one or two departments within an organization and then successfully bubble up and throughout the organization. However, we also know it is much more effective to start top down and ensure that leadership commitment. The other element, another element, is to ensure that we have a project champion role, which the senior leaders in the organization can play so that they really guide the operational excellence program throughout the organization. The third element aligns also to the top management commitment and the project champion role by ensuring that the organization knows through the leadership commitment and conversations that Six Sigma or your operational excellence program is going to be the key engine of the organization's business transformation strategy. Also, top management's role is to create the infrastructure and to help align to the strategies, the business strategies in the organization. So the champion role with respect to the executive sponsorship will include developing an implementation strategy for the operational excellence program. So a lot of times you can develop great plans and great improvement ideas, but they never get implemented. So the champion's role is to ensure that the implementation of the ideas occur. Also, the stakeholders need to be held accountable for the program's success. The project champions and the leaders also need to be responsible for selecting the people to be part of the operational excellence projects and to ensure that their resources are allocated appropriately. A lot of times this will entail getting the right support staff, meaning technology, the process improvement folks, and so forth, allocated onto these projects. Holding people accountable, empowering them to come up with ideas and implement those ideas is also the champion's role, as well as reviewing project status and ensuring that improvement is occurring. So let's move into the findings on the program governance. So the program governance, and one of the nice things about Six Sigma is the strong governance that it already had embedded in the methodology, as far as training people on certain levels of knowledge, as far as black belts and green belts and possibly yellow belts, having champion training and so forth. Having those elements of understanding what is the methodology that I'm going to be using, what are the steps and activities that are performed, which tools are going to be used. Some are going to be required, some are going to be optional and pulled in from your toolkit as necessary. Focusing on having a network of folks that can share and learn from each other. And then, of course, measuring the success of the projects. The third key element is the strategic alignment. So I know I have been part of Six Sigma programs where people go through green belt and black belt training and they have to think of their own projects. What is a burning need for them in their department or possibly in a couple departments. But that can be successful to a point, but it's really important to build the infrastructure for operational excellence to really be able to tie to the key strategies and the core processes in the organization. So a lot of these elements within the strategic alignment is understanding what are the core processes that align to the strategic needs of the organization, ensuring that the projects show this alignment, having the metrics, perhaps in a balanced scorecard type of tool where you can show the value across the organization all the way from the business goals and the metrics, having some type of monetary justification for the benefits of the projects, focusing on incorporating the operational excellence projects into the strategic roadmap. So I want to pause for a second as you see the key elements and some of the components within these elements. I wanted to ask if you have any questions first on what's been out in the literature or perhaps what you've seen in your practice. Okay, so let's continue. All right, so based on the literature and, again, practice and experience that I've seen, and also interfacing with a lot of the quality and process improvement and operational excellence professionals, I put together the Six Sigma leadership framework, and I really knew I was onto something when I wrote that down, that Six Sigma leadership framework, and realized that the initials, or that the acronym fit my initials, SLF. So I thought, wow, I really must be onto something here. So that was kind of a coincidence, kind of a neat coincidence. So the three elements, again, that are part of this framework that can be used to help people to really guide leaders for developing what their operational excellence program looks like include the three elements that we've seen that are important in the literature and also practice: the sponsorship element, the governance element, and then the strategic alignment. In addition to that, I've also developed the supporting infrastructure of what's called the process architecture, and I'll explain that it includes strategy, process, leadership, and information models, and we'll discuss that towards the end of this presentation. It's really the supporting infrastructure for the sponsorship, governance, and strategic alignment. So let's delve deeper into this leadership framework. So role, the communication of a consistent message and ensuring cultural alignment. Critical in ensuring the strategic alignment. And what you'll notice about all three of these elements are there's a lot of interaction and alignment between the three elements. So you'll see the need for the part of the sponsorship role ensures that strategic alignment occurs, which is one of the three elements, and also ensuring that they've defined an infrastructure and governance model for the operational excellence program. Again, that governance being one of the three elements, but it's the executive sponsor's role to ensure that that happens. They are really the face of the operational excellence program. They identify and select resources. They help to identify which projects are worked on. They help to remove any barriers in the organization and to ensure that people are aligned to and supporting the operational excellence program. They are also responsible for helping people to celebrate their successes. I know many times we're furiously working on implementing improvements in both process and information systems, and we forget to stop and reward people, to celebrate their successes, and we just kind of keep rolling on to the next project. So I think it's really important for the leaders to recognize folks and to ensure that people take the time to celebrate their successes. Another role that the executive sponsor has is to communicate a consistent message. They will need to develop what that message is, and then also communicate that to start building a common language around the operational excellence focus. In one organization, when we started developing the mission of the process improvement or operational excellence program, we first focused on efficiency and productivity and doing things more timely. But we soon realized that that really didn't align well with the culture that was really focused on providing excellent customer service and satisfaction. So we quickly realized that we needed to ensure that we were aligned with the culture and with what people were most proud of in the organization, providing that great customer experience. And so we quickly identified that we needed to focus not only on the efficiency of a process, of doing things in a streamlined manner without the typical lean waste in a process, and we wanted to also highlight the power of our Operational Excellence Program to be able to provide that seamless customer experience. So we provided more of a balance of the customer service, the quality of the process and the data and information that's being used in your process, and the efficiency. So we quickly recrafted our message to be able to ensure that consistent message was communicating to people in a way that was aligned with the culture. And then we'll talk more about also the infrastructure and governance in a few seconds. So this is an example of the sponsorship role, but it also includes the governance element as well. So what we did as an example in one organization is we built a process council. And this council consisted of leaders across the organization, senior leaders across the organization, that would be responsible for the governance of the leadership of the Operational Excellence Program. So they would be responsible for setting the key priorities and helping to ensure alignment to the strategic goals of the organization. They would define which process improvement initiatives would be selected to be worked on and ensure those resources were aligned to those initiatives. They designated the project champions and also the process owners that were working on these process improvement projects. They also communicated the successes and the status of these projects, and they helped the organization recognize people who are working on and implementing improvements, and then also celebrating that we've talked about was so important to stop and share people's successes. They also were able to look at the different projects and initiatives and the improvements that were implemented to be able to leverage best practices that were being implemented from one area of the business that it could be used in another area of the business. They had that high-level, 50,000 feet view of the projects and the processes across the enterprise. They also would help to understand the status and encourage projects to be completed and to progress as needed. And then they help to encourage the cultural alignment of the program. And so we would meet at least on a quarterly basis to understand the status of the projects, to prioritize new projects, and to be able to help that overall alignment. So that's a great example of the governance to help encourage the leader's role. Another example is to define the message, a consistent message. I had talked about how we incorporated not just the focus on ensuring the process was done faster. This is what we use to help communicate to folks what we call process transformation, not just improving, but designing new processes and transforming processes. So we said process transformation will help make processes simpler, faster, and more valuable. So a balance of all of those elements, simpler being less steps and less complexity, reducing waste and improving the cost and the number of resources needed to perform processes. Faster was being more timely, being able to meet those customer expectations in a more timely manner. And then the valuable component, meeting customers' requirements at low cost and high service. So again, the balance of the customer service and quality and the timeliness and efficiency. So this was really important because it communicated that consistent message and got the common language out to people. This is another example of a tool that can be used. Many of you might have heard of an elevator speech. Now, one kind of glitch that we had is that our CEO usually takes the stairs, so we had to realign to being able to deliver this consistent message. The way an elevator speech is designed is that you run into the CEO in an elevator, and then you have your minute and a half, if it's a tall elevator, hopefully, to be able to convey the status of your Six Sigma project, for example. Or someone else could meet the CEO, and the CEO could explain the purpose of the Operational Excellence Program very quickly. But again, our CEO takes the stairs, so we not only had to develop the elevator speech, but then practice it while people are running up the stairs. So that added a kind of another element of complexity to our elevator speech. But again, these are incredibly effective. We actually have people create elevator speeches for their projects as they're going through a Greenbelt training, so that they can easily convey to people in a very short period of time something that they've developed and practiced that really represents the value of their project. And so the elevator speech can include, who the team is, who are we, what are we going to do, what's the project, why must we do it, what is the sense of urgency there, what will we anticipate the results to be, what are our targets, what are we trying to focus on, and then if it is someone that can help us, what do we need from them? So those are the elements that are effective in an elevator speech. Again, helping to communicate that consistent message. So from the sponsorship and the cultural alignment element, we saw it's very important. Now, I remember when I was studying Dr. W. Edwards Deming and Joseph Juran's principles and methods, it was interesting to see that Joseph Juran generally did not believe that a cultural realignment was needed, that he believed that folks could really work within the current culture of the organization, whereas Dr. Deming believed that you really had to shake that organization up and help people to understand and learn the language of statistics. So he really proposed more of a changing the culture versus aligning to the culture. What I found to be effective, especially in service organizations, is to meet the people where they are at first, and then slowly you can realign the culture somewhat and kind of change the culture to better align with the continuous improvement principles and thinking. So what we did is we identified, and we again go through this in our Greenbelt training, how people typically think from a traditional thinking perspective. So organizations that haven't embraced operational excellence yet will a lot of times only fix problems and not really be proactive to think about what does the customer need and how can I better meet those customer needs. What they'll do is they'll find problems and they will focus on improving around those problems, but not proactively looking at what the customer's needs are. So again, they'll react more to dissatisfaction and problems versus the continuous improvement principles and thinking, where they will focus on preventing dissatisfaction. So another element of traditional thinking is that focus on results at any cost-oriented thinking, and versus really focusing on the system, the processes that connect to those other processes that create the system thinking, and the discipline across the organization. Also, the traditional thinking is people get kind of used to the waste and rework, accepting the status quo, whereas again, the continuous improvement focus is to eliminate that waste and improve processes and throughput. A lot of times also what happens in organizations that haven't embraced the continuous improvement principles is they tend to blame people, and they try to think they believe that you can manage the process. If you manage the people, then you've managed the processes. And we all know from Dr. Deming that he believed that people can only impact about 15% of the problems in a process, whereas management really needs to make the changes to impact about 85% of the problems. So that focus on the system, reducing variation, and measuring processes. A lot of organizations, again, will focus on rewarding firefighting and reacting to crises instead of rewarding that team effort and improvement. Again, focusing on measuring cost and productivity versus measuring throughput, customer satisfaction, looking at your processes and focusing on quality. And then the top-down kind of thinking where people aren't empowered, that authoritative view versus the empowerment and accountability that's embedded in continuous improvement. So I place these here and talk about them because I think it's important to show the example of where we want to get people from a continuous improvement principles and thinking. And then what we did is we took this, and we have 15 service excellence standards in our organization, and we wanted to assure that the continuous improvement or process transformation principles, as we called them, were aligned to what is already embedded in our culture to ensure service excellence and a great customer experience. So as you look at these, our first one is participate in a daily meeting to discuss a service standard, embrace our service vision, and so forth. So what we've done is we worked with our process council, and then we also have this exercise within each Greenbelt project, Greenbelt training, where they're working on projects, and we have them think about what is the alignment, which of these service excellence standards align to which of the process transformation or continuous improvement principles. And so they really can rationalize and understand that the service excellence standards do align to what we're trying to affect from an operational excellence perspective. So this is a great tool to help ensure that cultural alignment. And then you can always, where your actual culture doesn't maybe align perfectly to a process transformation or continuous improvement principle, then you can work on nudging people towards moving the culture a little bit closer to that alignment. So these were the rest of those service excellence standards. And the nice thing about this exercise, too, is you can see the connection between multiple service excellence standards and these multiple continuous improvement principles. So a very effective example, and I encourage you to do something similar in your organization, because most organizations have some type of guiding principles that they use, and you can see how closely that alignment occurs to the process improvement, continuous improvement, operational excellence principles. So now let's move into some examples on governance of what helps to ensure better governance. So this is an example of how we develop the governance for operational excellence. We talked a little bit about the Process Council and their role as the overall senior leadership representatives to identify and prioritize process improvement initiatives and to ensure that progress is being made on those initiatives. Then we also have a group of our process transformation program team that consists of, in our case, about 4 people, myself, a master black belt, and we've got a couple black belts and then a green belt. And so the role of the process transformation team is not to design the processes per se, but it's to facilitate the design and improvement of processes. So we facilitate cross-functional strategic improvements, and then we also train green belts or potential green belts and in process improvement methodologies and tools, and then mentor those folks so that they can be improving processes. Now, one differentiator, instead of sending people into a Greenbelt training and saying, you know, just figure out a project that you can work on for a problem or a pain that you're feeling, we actually select the people who are going to be involved in the training by first selecting the processes that are strategically aligned to be improved, and then identifying who owns those processes, and then who should be on those projects to improve the processes, and then we'll bring them into our Greenbelt training. So it's a little different than what I've traditionally seen in organizations, and it's really super effective. And then you can get a little bit bigger projects that have more of a strategic and cross-functional focus into these Greenbelt training, and then helping to facilitate through those projects. So then the other element that we've added to the governance is incorporating a process network, so we have monthly what we call lunch and learns, or brown bag lunches, where we pick a special tool or an interesting tool, say Pareto charts or process maps, and we provide additional information on the tools, and then people can also share their successes and maybe their challenges with a group of people that are kind of experiencing the same things that they are as they're working through their projects. And then this helps to ensure that people continue to use the tools after their projects are successfully completed. And one thing that's important to identify here is this is a communication and governance structure. It's not meant to be a reporting structure. So Greenbelts do not report in any way to the Process Council. We don't report to the Process Council, but it's a governing structure. So we provide information to the Process Council. They provide that guidance and prioritization of projects, but it just infers governance, not reporting structure. So it's nice because the reporting structure didn't have to change, but this was incredibly valuable in helping with operational excellence. So another element of governance is we're working towards building scorecards for each of our process improvement initiatives. Now there's different ways you could do this. You could start with process metric scorecards or ideas around what to measure, and then implement those measures for the processes. But what we found, because we didn't have a lot of process metrics in our organization, is we've developed the different process improvement initiatives, and then we try to develop the process metrics that help to ensure performance in customer service. Again, those same elements that we talked about with our communication of our message, our common message: timeliness, quality, cost, and revenue. So what we will eventually have is a complete scorecard that can ensure the performance of the processes. And then once we implement improvements, we can ensure that we have had successful improvement, and we can assess that from a qualitative and or quantitative perspective as appropriate. Okay, so let's go to the third element and some examples of how this helps with operational excellence. Our final element here is process architecture. So we've seen the process or the sponsorship elements and getting the cultural alignment and prioritization of projects aligned to the strategy. We've seen the governance elements that can be effective to build the infrastructure for ensuring what is the methodology going to look like, what tools are we going to use, and how do we leverage the resources that can help us to affect process improvement. This last element kind of ties everything together through this process architecture. What this does is it provides the repository of knowledge across the enterprise through these conceptual meta models. And they're conceptual because they really provide for the elements that we should be collecting about our business. And so we've identified 4 different models, meta models: the strategies, the processes, the leadership, and information. And I'll show you each high-level view of each. So the first one is the strategy model. Now, in order to be able to align your process improvement initiatives with the strategy, the strategic goals in your organization, you need to understand what that is. A lot of us, you'll have the mission of your organization right on your website, and that's fantastic. But a lot of these other things may not be really written down and generally understood by everyone in the organization. The value of this process architecture is for you to document and provide this traceability and this history and this repository of this information. So some of the elements that you want to write down are: what is the mission of the organization? What's the vision? And then how does the culture in the organization, those perhaps service excellence standards or guiding principles, support the vision and the mission? Then we develop or document, if we already have developed the strategic plan, we extract the strategies, goals, objectives, and tactics that are important to the organization. And again, some organizations will have a documented strategic plan, others it'll be just in people's heads. And sometimes it may not even exist. So what this can do is to help make that happen. And then there are also elements of policies, of things that influence the policies, and what's called our assessment, or our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. We identify those because that potentially impacts the ability for us to meet our mission and our vision and our strategic plan as well. So furthering the process architecture, we also have a process model, which represents the processes in our organization. We identify and start at a high level where we identify the value chains that provide value to our customers. And then we develop and document the process maps, and then document also the metrics that support those processes. The leadership model helps us to understand our workforce engagement, our leadership and governance, and then the organizational structure in the organization. And then the last element within our architecture is the information that is used connected to the process maps, what information is used in our processes, and then what information systems or applications are used to support the processes. And then we've taken this one step further. To be able to get the strategic alignment, we need to understand our processes. So we have a very simple process map architecture so that we can document and have a repository of all of our processes. And you can see that many of you may use swim lane process maps. It takes that concept, but it builds the additional knowledge that we need in our process architecture that you saw on the slide before. So it identifies the role that is performing each of the activities. It's got the swim lanes of the activities in the particular process. So it's got the rectangles or squares that identify the tasks that are performed, the decision points, the start and end points. The next swim lane provides for the listing of documents and information that is used within each of the steps of the process. We identify the potential risks to our process being effectively managed and controlled, and then those controls that are important to ensure that our process is performed as it should be. Then our next swim lane there is using knowledge. We document ideas for improvement. We document metrics, process metrics that are going to be used or are used within the process. And we also can easily identify when there are review points or quality control steps in our process. And the last swim lane shows the system or method. So there we get our repository or listing inventory of our applications used within this process. And sometimes you've got a manual step, sometimes you've got a system step, and sometimes you've got a combination of a manual and system step. So this process architecture, process map repository, really helps us to understand not only what activities are performed and by whom they are performed, the roles and activities, but it also helps us to connect to what information systems, what documents are used, how are we measuring our process. So a lot of value there in order to be able to, we must understand first to be able to document our processes before we can improve them. The last element that this process architecture helps with is in the actual prioritization of the improvement projects. So if you take the strategic plan, the goals, objectives, tactics, and you use the matrix to be able to relate the objectives and tactics together to ensure that the tactics support those objectives, you can then take those tactics and relate them to your individual process improvement projects, and then relate your projects to your processes. So you can get that alignment from all the way from your strategic goals and objectives through to the processes that you're improving and the projects you're working on. The other element helps us to see a view of our value chains and the high-level functions that are performed in our value chains, and then be able to relate our processes, our process maps that we have documented to those functions, and then understand the activities that are performed within the processes. What this helps us do is to get, again, that repository to be able to use some of the same activities across similar processes across the organization, kind of that concept of reuse. And then the performance level helps us to relate the processes and are critical to satisfaction, which we call, or you might call critical to quality. Identify the metrics that relate to those critical to satisfaction criteria and the metrics to the actual results. So what this helps us do is if we have a documentation of our process architecture, it helps us to ensure at an enterprise level we use this information to ensure that we're aligned to our strategic plan, that at an operational level we understand our processes all the way to the activity level so that we can leverage those processes and activities in a best practice manner, and then we can ensure that we have metrics and results for our processes at a performance level. So a lot of value to be able to leverage that information and really use it to prioritize and to assess performance and for improvement. So in conclusion, this framework, I believe, supports the key drivers that are identified in the literature to help with leadership and operational excellence. It also helps the organization focus what is important so you can really ensure that the value of the Lean Six Sigma methods and tools can really be realized, that we've got a consistent message and are communicating that message. It can help ensure that we have cultural alignment, and it's helping us to move towards those continuous improvement principles. It helps us to provide that visibility to results and successes, and then it enables rewards and celebration, which is always so important. So from a future focus, so I would encourage each of you to see if you can use the elements of the framework to enhance your operational excellence program. So one, you could work on, are there other elements that could refine this Six Sigma leadership framework? It would be nice to be able to apply the strategic alignment to multiple organizations. I've done it to several, but it would be great to be able to apply it to many different industries and organizational types. To further assess different organizational values and the cultural alignment and impact. and then potentially assess other alternative governance models that are used. And then to apply the process architecture to overall process and quality management in multiple organizational settings. So lots of great ways that we could further enhance the use of the framework and further enhance operational excellence in the organizations. So I would like to open up for a few questions. We have a few minutes if you would like to ask questions now. Really appreciate your attention and hope this was useful for you.
All right, thank you, Sandy. And we do have several questions that I'd like to pose to you in the final minutes. One is, you have provided a very comprehensive framework for leading operational excellence in organizations. What about sustaining that framework? Did you find anything in literature that you could share, a couple highlights, or maybe something in your career experience that you could share with the group?
I think from sustaining the operational excellence focus, I think it's continuous, and I think it's almost every day. I think what I have found in my experience is, and looking at the literature, is I think that the literature over the past easily 10 to 15 years has stayed pretty consistent as far as what are the elements that need to be incorporated for operational excellence. So I think we've all, I mean, it's not a surprise that we say everybody needs top management commitment, or else an operational excellence program isn't going to move anywhere. So I think we all know that, but it's in how to make that happen and how to help senior leadership understand their role in making that happen. It's not the process improvement or the quality department that can make that happen. It's really leadership that needs to own that. So I think in practice, what I've seen to be effective from sustaining the program is that you can't get stale. Just like anything else, the program itself has to change. So when I identify future focus as what are the other governance models out there, your governance model may need to evolve and change. It might not work this way. If you try a process console and embedding green belts within departments, maybe that won't work. Maybe you need a bigger process improvement project when you start, and then you can as you get the knowledge out to the organization, maybe it can shrink. So I would say it's really in continuing to improve that governance structure and ensuring the alignment to the strategic plan. That's got to be reevaluated at least each year, and then also, having the leadership continue to understand the cultural alignment and what the message needs to be to evolve. Like I said, one example was we focused on one message and really evolved that message as we learned what made sense for people and what didn't work.
Mm-hmm. And it is a challenge to assess. You talk about taking a look at it every year, and just, the challenge of figuring out, how do you assess that? Is it an organizational assessment where you send out a questionnaire to employees and, get their thoughts and to kind of test their understanding of continuous improvement and what is being accomplished? Is it a retreat, an executive retreat, where you're debriefing the year and just taking an assessment of where the organization stands? And different organizations have done all kinds of things on that assessment to set the actions for the upcoming year.
Yeah, and I believe, I agree with you. I think you could do all of those things, and I think the important thing is to do something. I think surveys, I think retreats, I think just having the senior leaders very connected with the folks and to see what works and what doesn't work, I think that's important. I think you can use a lot of the infrastructure from an HR perspective to assess employee engagement. I think the engagement scores, as people are more empowered to change their own processes, I think that is very helpful. So I think, again, there's a lot of different things that can work. and something that might not work as well. And so it's just kind of that continuous improvement and learning and growing with it. But I think that could be a whole research area in and of itself, be a whole assessment. How do you assess the effectiveness of these programs?
I agree. I agree. That's a scope in and of itself. I have a couple questions related to projects. So let me pose them to you together because they're kind of related. So the first one deals with synchronizing project work with learning the methods and tools of Lean Six Sigma. So the question is, how do you synchronize about learning the tools with the project work? The second question, before you start to answer that, the second question relates to how do you select priority projects? Because early on in the presentation, you were talking about, it's good for belts and practitioners to be thinking about their own projects, but the executives also need to be identifying projects that align with the strategic plan. So can you talk to us a little bit more about how projects are selected and how you synchronize the project work with the training?
Sure. So yeah, those are both great questions. So I think the way that we have done it, and I'm not sure it's the absolute best way, is we tried to make it more of a top-down understanding of which are the processes that really need our attention, that are most broke from a customer perspective, and then we started with say three of those more cross-functional strategic initiatives. When we got to, and that was our team, our process transformation team, facilitating projects and process improvement efforts that were broader in scope and that were bigger, and then we got people on those projects that owned those processes. Then we moved into the Greenbelt projects and Greenbelt training, where we then had a pretty good feel for what are the strategic issues, and then we could identify kind of sub-projects related to those core process areas that impact the customer the most, that are related to the strategies, and then defined smaller scoped projects that were more appropriate for Greenbelts to learn related to the tools and the methods. So it was kind of carving smaller projects out of those core key strategic initiatives.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. We are just at the top of the hour, so there were a couple questions that we were not able to get to. And what I'd suggest is that if you'd like to follow up with Sandy in this, that the last slide that we have is going to show our email addresses so that you can follow up with some contact information. So let me close out the webcast. I do want to encourage you to visit the Morestein website. All right, we have a number of product offerings that we've mentioned along the way in terms of blended learning and belt training. So we have blended learning available at the Master Black Belt and blended Black Belt levels, as well as a whole menu of other process improvement online training courses. If you're just looking for free resources, again, I put you to our website. We have very, very rich content on our website of white papers, articles, tool tutorials, all right, that are of keen interest to a lot of our visitors, along with a webcast library. So again, please visit our website. Let's move on to the next slide. And again, we thank you for spending the last hour with us. Thank you, Sandy, for sharing the framework with us. We feel delighted that you were able to join us today. So
my pleasure. Thank you.
Here are our email addresses, and yes, we will be sharing the slides with you. I'll pass these along to our web development team, and they'll be posting them. As soon as they're posted, I'll send you an email directly with a link to the exact page so you can follow up. Sandy had a lot of detail on those slides, so they're there for your reference and sharing as well. We hope that you'll join us next month. Marty Beltz is going to be our presenter, and she'll be talking about building the infrastructure to make training stick. So developing training is one piece of it, and then making it stick and bringing capability to the organization is the other piece. Okay? So thank you again for sharing part of your day with us, and we hope to see you next month. Thank you for joining us.